USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, this week's game of the week sure lived up to its billing. It was Minnesota Duluth at Denver on Saturday night, but really that was the second half of a two-game series that was pretty exciting and finally got the Denver monkey off the Duluth back.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, for a long time this weekend, it didn't look like that monkey was getting anywhere off of Duluth's back. They lose 2-0 on Friday and then fall behind 3-0 in the third period. I mean, almost 7 minutes into the third period. Finally, at the 6:56 mark, Nick Swaney puts a goal in, makes it 3-1, and that was floodgates. Billy Exel at 9:27. Then Scott Perunovich on a shot from the point that the goaltender fell backwards, and as he did so, the puck trickled past him and into the net. That with 1.6 seconds left, and then Cole Koepke able to win the game dramatically in overtime, 52 seconds into overtime. Just unbelievable in terms of a comeback. One of the best, according to what I've read on social media, in school history. They had a box score, I believe, from the 70s that I believe was a 4-goal rally in that game. But regardless, that is a big win for Duluth. That, if anything, just gives them a little bit more confidence against Denver, obviously a confidence in themselves. But, there's still probably some questions as, to why it took 5.5 periods for a pretty potent offense to get going.
Well, you mentioned Devin Cooley, the goaltender for Denver. You didn't mention him by name, but I think we should highlight him on Friday night in that 2-0 win. 35 saves for him, 38 saves for him in the shutout. And then on Saturday night, 41 saves. So, Duluth handily outshooting Denver in both games, particularly on Friday night, losing 2-0, but outshooting the Pioneers 38-14.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good telltale sign for Duluth in terms of, the success that they in essence had. You don't know how many. I didn't get to see either game on TV or really haven't watched too much video from either one. So you don't know how many were grade A chances, but you've got to assume when you're, posting 80 plus shots over 2 nights, there's going to be a lot of good grade A's. And, if you run into a hot goaltender, that can be a big factor. Obviously, Cooley was very strong both nights. It wasn't until late on Saturday that his armor was cracked. But once it did crack, that was fortunate for Duluth. Now, Denver, they're also probably sitting there wondering about closing out games because they had blown 2 2-goal leads the previous weekend to St. Cloud State, then a 3-goal lead on Saturday night. So that in itself can be a big issue too, and something that Denver is probably going to have to deal with. And how do you close out games?
Well, St. Cloud State improved to 11-1-0 with a pair of wins over Bemidji this weekend.
And that's a team that just keeps rolling. And I'll be very interested to see on Monday morning when the poll comes out, who's getting the first place votes this week. Obviously, St. Cloud, you can probably make a case that at 10-1 or 11-1 at this point, they're going to deserve a lot of consideration. There's going to be a lot of teams in there, but they keep rolling. A 2-0 win the first night and then a 7-2 win on the back end. The offense gets really going on Saturday night. And I think that's just a team that's playing with really good confidence right now. And when you have, we say it all the time, when you have that confidence in college hockey or in really any college sport, it goes a long way. Now they'll get a weekend off. And that's, it's interesting when you get to a holiday like Thanksgiving and some teams get that weekend off. Some teams don't. There's definitely a reduced number of games played over Thanksgiving. But when you're that hot, sometimes you just don't want to slow down. And that's a big part for St. Cloud. I'm sure that they don't want the weekend off right now.
Yeah, it's always a question of whether do you want the momentum or do you want the rest? Well, UMass, you speak about teams getting some votes in the poll, some number one votes. UMass may be making a case. They're number one in the very way too early pairwise, but they are staying hot, 10-1 overall, a win over Holy Cross, and then on Sunday, downing New Hampshire 4-2.
Yeah, everything that they're doing right now seems to turn to gold. They won games last weekend against Providence, where they kind of had to steal the games, outshot heavily both nights, particularly on the second night. This weekend they outshoot both of their opponents, still end up in some pretty close games. New Hampshire on Sunday actually pulled within a goal after falling behind 3-0. But that's where UMass has some of that response. And right after New Hampshire gets within a goal, about 2.5 minutes later, Anthony Delgado, who, talking with Greg Carville, really likes this kid. He's a freshman that had some high expectations. He's starting to come into his own. He gets a big insurance goal. They go on to a 2-goal win. And you just kind of started to feel that this is a very strong Massachusetts team. I think I mentioned it last week. I want to see what happens to this team when they get into some adversity. You know that there's probably going to be a point that you lose maybe a couple of games back to back. That's the weekend. That's the time of year, I should say, that I want to see how UMass can respond, because as solid as I think this team is, the one thing that they don't have is any experience in terms of having success. They have for too long now been toward the bottom of the Hockey East standings. They won a playoff series in the first round last year, pushed Northeastern, a good Northeastern team, into a tough series, a tough 2-game series at Northeastern before finally falling and ending their season. But they just haven't had to go through the real difficult things and the expectations that now rest on them. If it was a number one position in the poll at some point, that's another thing you have to wonder how a team handles it. We've seen that before, where schools have never been number one and then they get to number one, and boy, you've got some problems. That now the expectations, now the pressure, now the weight is on the shoulders of the players a little bit more. I love Greg Carville as a coach. I'm interested to see how he would coach through something like that.
The other thing that's really great for UMass right now is they're getting terrific fan support. And you talk to players, you talk to coaches, there's a little bit of an intangible there. There's a little bit of something, if you get the crowd behind you, that may make the difference in a close game. And if you're getting good fan support, that just adds to the momentum.
Well, it's interesting because fans had started to call the Mullins Center the Mullins Mausoleum, because when that place is empty, it is devastatingly quiet. But when you put some fans in there, I can remember a series, it's going way back to maybe Jonathan Quick's time there, but in Cahoon as the head coach. But they played Maine in the first round playoff series. Or I'm sorry, it was back then it was just quarterfinals. It was the first round, but there were only 3 rounds back then. A best of 3 series against Maine, and they packed the place both nights, and the atmosphere was immeasurable, absolutely incredible. So if they start getting that fan support, if they start drawing big crowds, that becomes a building that's extremely difficult to play in.
Yeah, and it's not that long ago that UMass was on top, and we were thinking of its cross-state fellow state university, UMass Lowell, as being the weaker sister and one on the way out the door almost. So it is a big comeback. You mentioned Jonathan Quick. That was an NCAA tournament team back then.
Yeah, there were some really, there were a couple, I think it was probably in Cahoon's years, there were 3 very strong teams. One got to the NCAA regional finals before losing. He got, there was one before that got to a Hockey East final and played a 1-0 game before losing in that one. So yeah, there's been some decent teams there, but that is a school, when their sports do well, they support it. When they don't do well, they turn their back on you pretty quickly, and it makes for a difficult situation. But when UMass Amherst, that Amherst campus, supports their sports teams, it gets hopping. They really are. Maybe you call them bandwagon fans, but they're loud bandwagon fans, and I think that really creates a competitive edge.
I think when you're a student fan base, you're allowed to be bandwagon because you're not there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Well, speaking of teams hot in Hockey East, Providence, 7 goals each night against Merrimack, 7-2 at Merrimack, and 7-5 yesterday back home at Schneider Arena. This coming off a week where they were swept by UMass. putting up some big offensive numbers there for the Friars.
Yeah, I was really interested to see how they were going to react to that series against UMass, because both nights they fell behind 2-0 very quickly, had really good responses in the second period or the third period, depending on which night we're talking about. But then ultimately gave up the game-winning goal very late. Here, both of these games for the Friars, great quick starts, and that's what they look. Both nights they scored in the first few seconds of each game. So 13 seconds in on Friday night, and I have to look. I think it was about 22 or 23 seconds on Saturday night. So this is a team right now that we know that they have the power. They might be, despite what the records say and despite what just happened in the head-to-head series, this might be the best team in Hockey East. They maybe don't play like it every night, but I think in terms of being a deep team, in terms of having the talent, Providence probably has the best overall team in Hockey East.
Should we be concerned defensively about Saturday with giving up 5 goals and letting Merrimack back in 3-3 early on in that second period? 5 goals against is uncharacteristic for Hayden hockey.
It certainly is. I mean, he's one of the best goaltenders in the league, if not in the country. I think that game, and I haven't had the chance to talk to Nate Lehman about it, but I think that game might have been a little bit disjointed there. It looks like there was just a ton of penalties called, a total of 17 penalties called in the game, a total of 15 power plays. So when you have those sorts of numbers, sometimes, things get away from you, both offensively and defensively. Obviously it was great to see them cranking with the goal scoring, but when you don't have any real rhythm or flow to the game, I have to wonder how much the penalties might have impacted that. I've not seen a ton of reason to be concerned about Providence's defense. This feels like an aberration, kind of that one data point that just doesn't align with the rest of the chart.
Arizona State managed to split on the road at Harvard, a 4-1 loss on Friday and a 3-2 overtime win on Saturday. And from what I understand, it sounded more like a home game in the stands at Bright than a road game for Arizona State.
I'll tell you, in Harvard's defense, it was Harvard-Yale yesterday in football, and that's a big draw. They were playing at Fenway Park kind of as a special game. They usually play it on campus. So that probably took a lot of their fan base out. I also don't think that when it's not a big-name team that everybody recognizes at Harvard, you usually don't see a ton of fans in that building. But as for Arizona State, they drew well. And if anybody watches video of the Johnny Walker tip on the game winner in overtime, I know that it was where the fans were in terms of where the video camera was, but it almost looked like an Arizona State home game with the crowd exploding in front of the cameras. If you have Twitter, check that one out, because it was one that really struck me how big that crowd was. And I think I actually got a chance to go over the practice on Thursday and talk to Greg Powers, and that's one of the things he mentioned. They get great fan support no matter what size building they're going to play in at home. They're going to get great fan support. As he said, we can build a 5,000 seat arena or 3,000. I think they're aiming it's going to be around 3,500 seats. He said they'll be full every night. We have 50,000 students on our campus, so you just have to have a small percentage of students adopt hockey as their sport, and you'll be packing things in every night. But obviously success breeds success in terms of the popularity. And right now a 10-win team that has tied the record in year 4, obviously, for the most wins in a season. And they've done it before Thanksgiving. I think they're playing really good hockey. And that's one of those things that when you're playing well and you have that confidence, you're going to keep winning games. And right now this is a dangerous team. Every team out there, that is going to be tough. The one challenge I really look at is the schedule remaining for them. We talked to Greg last week on our Tuesday night show, and they obviously not being part of a conference, you've got to kind of go out and just pick and build your schedule however you can. Because of that, a lot of the home games were front loaded. So they'll play Colorado College at home. For 2 games, they'll play Boston College at home. For 2 games, they'll play AIC at home. They do have a tournament, so technically it's 8 games in Arizona remaining. But on the other side of that, they have 12 games outside. So they'll be on the road a lot. They have 3 bye weekends, if you will, in the second half, just because there wasn't any opponent for them to be able to play. So those are going to be the big challenges when you're obviously doing a lot of travel. And then when you have those maybe momentum stopping weekends where you don't get to play, those will be some big challenges they'll face in the second half.
Well, it's a good thing for Arizona State that 3 leagues have odd numbers of teams to make some later season non-conference games available. One other thing to mention with Arizona State, another outstanding night in goal on Saturday night for Joey Daccord, 40 saves, including 3 in 2 minutes and 45 seconds of overtime.
Yeah, when talking to Greg Powers, he realizes what a gem he has there. And he is a player that probably becomes a flight risk at the end of this year. He likely will have an opportunity to sign with an NHL team. I can't remember who holds his rights off the top of my head, but he's got that talent, and he's been a game-changing player for the Sun Devils, but he'll also be a game-changing player at the pro level. So I think he likely, this might be the year for him to do things, because there might not be another season in Tempe for him. So I think he's a fantastic goaltender. He's proving it night in, night out, and that's what's really making this a special season for the Sun Devils.
Minnesota State, 10-1. They swept Ferris State this weekend. The Mavericks may be another team in the hunt for number 1. I don't think they'll be number 1 in the poll, but I do believe they'll get a few first place votes.
I think they deserve them. Right now we've got a bunch of teams with one loss in their, that have played well, and every one of those teams will get that recognition. UMass, Minnesota State, and St. Cloud. All 3 should probably get some of those votes, and I think then we'll see Duluth get some votes as well. But yeah, Minnesota State just rolls, and they 6 of their first 10 games at this point, 11 games that they've played, have been against nationally ranked opponents. This weekend it wasn't a nationally ranked opponent with Ferris State, but they took care of business. A 7-1 win on Friday, a 5-2 win on Saturday. They keep improving every week, it seems, and their standing in the poll has improved every week as well, from starting the season at 11 up to 7 up to 4 and now 3. This could be 2 or 1 this week. I wouldn't be totally surprised.
Well, let's turn for a moment to Atlantic hockey. And you rightly pointed out early on in the season, and you mentioned it with Paula Weston in Tuesday Morning Quarterback, that this is a league that's going to be really tight and maybe no team jumps to the top. If you look at the standings right now, the top 4 teams have played 10 games, while there are teams who've only played 7 or 6, or even in the case of Holy Cross, just 5 league games so far. So there's a lot of hockey to be played. But we saw teams sweep early on and then get swept. Niagara made a statement sweeping the Battle of the Bridge on Thursday and Saturday with Canisius. So that is a league that seems to be, at least within itself, very competitive. Canisius and Air Force without their top goalies right now, but then AIC lost their top goalie, Stefano Duranti, last Saturday, and then Zacharias Scott came in and shut out Air Force twice. So you just don't know in that league, and you're right, that's going to be tight. Still probably only going to have 1 team make the NCAAs, but in the very early, meaningless pairwise, there is an Atlantic hockey team in the top 16, RAT, which went from 23-14 despite not playing a game this weekend.
That's why we say the pairwise is absolutely useless at this point in the year.
Exactly.
But you look at the standings right now, and 6 points will separate first place and 7th place, and that's usually that. I always think of the last night of the season in Atlantic hockey, and teams are battling for a bye week or battling to even stay at home in the first round of the playoffs. You could finish anywhere from 4th to 9th or 4th to 10th at times in that league. And that's, obviously matters so much in terms of where you're going that following weekend, or if you're even playing. So I think we all know that, it's just something that happens in Atlantic hockey where you have pretty good parity. You don't always have that consistency, that dominance of one team. And it's showing again. I think that, you look at the first 4 teams right now, they've all played 10 games and 2 points separates them. So I think we're in for another good competitive race in Atlantic hockey. It always impresses me how even the bottom teams seem to be able to compete very strongly with the top of that league.
Yeah, and the bottom isn't the bottom the way the bottom used to be in that conference 5 years ago. And that's a big part of it. Speaking of Atlantic hockey, earlier this week, Commissioner Bob DeGregorio had his contract extended through the 2020-2021 season. Not really a surprise. Things have been on a slow but steady pace upward in Atlantic hockey.
I think that's a conference where stabilizing and remaining stable is really very important. I think a lot of conferences look at growth and those types of things, and there has been growth under DeGregorio, and now the fact that every team is in a pretty modern arena. There's some of those arenas are older than others, but at least in those cases they're on campus facilities. But you got AIC, you got Bentley, and you got Sacred Heart out of youth hockey rinks, which I think that's a big critical step for that league to have places that teams don't mind going to play, especially for non-conference games. So that's something that it was a big part of what DeGregorio wanted to do, and he accomplished that. And I think that's really important. And I'm happy for Digger. He's a great guy. He's a good friend. I've known him for a long time, back to his days when he was at Merrimack and I was a student at UMass Lowell. So we've known each other for more than 20 years, and a good guy, a good administrator. And I think for that league, that's the right move, keeping him on and remaining stable. That's what that league needs, is just more stability.
Well, one thing that kind of seemed to me like we were seeing a lot of this past weekend was goal scoring. And certainly we've seen that all season long with Penn State. They're averaging 5.73 goals a game, giving up 3.45. So I said, maybe it's time to dig into the archives and see if we are really seeing an uptick in scoring. And the answer is no, we're not. In fact, this past weekend, even though there were some big games, the games with Penn State and Michigan, high scoring, Providence putting up a lot, a 9-6 game Niagara over Canisius, this past weekend averaging 5.46 combined goals a game. The 20 season average is 5.79. The 10 season average is 5.65. And there actually has been a downward trend over the last 20 years. And I only went back 20 years because that's what's in the USCHO database. But the first 4 years of that, the first 4 seasons, over 6 goals combined, and there's been a steady downward trend since then. Although in the last 3 years, an uptick as the NCAA has tried to adjust rules to get a little bit better scoring. But still, over that time, the 10-year average has been pretty tight. I guess that appearances can be deceiving, because at the same time you have teams like Penn State putting up a lot of goals, and maybe right now 25 teams with 3 or more goals per game. There are 12 teams who are giving up 2 or fewer goals per game. So maybe you have some teams trying to do it with offense and then teams doing it with defense, balancing that out.
You certainly do. I mean, for every team that goes and scores 7 or 8 or 9 or 11, as the case was last week for Penn State, you have shutouts. We had 8 shutouts this weekend, 6 of them on Friday night. So you end up almost counteracting, and then you throw into that, a game such as Northeastern Vermont on Friday night, a 1-0 shutout. So yes, I think there are teams out there that are dominating. And when I look at Penn State and their current offense, yes, their goals against is higher than most coaches prefer. Anything north of 3 is considered high, but they're almost at 6. And, you think back to 6 and what teams were scoring 6 goals a game. The one that always stands out is the 92-93 Maine team. That was averaging right about that, about 6, maybe a little more than 6 goals a game. That team, of course, went 42-1-2 and won the national title. So yes, it's wonderful to score goals, and it's great. But I think I always say, come playoff time, you don't want to get into track meets, and there'll be teams that can shut you down. And if you get shut down defensively, you need your defense to match that at the other end. And I think Penn State's really enjoys scoring a lot of goals, but they need to start keeping some of those out. They gave up 6 goals last Saturday night and won the game 11-6. They gave up 6 goals this past Saturday night, and won that game 7-6. So you can only keep giving up 6 goals too many times before it bites you in the butt. And I think that's one of those really fine lines between having a just absolute potent offense, but not matching it with a standout defense.
A couple of weeks ago, we were talking with Bob DeGregorio on one of our podcasts, our Spotlight Tuesday night podcast. And he was talking about the improvement in goaltending, and certainly numbers are up there. What has to be along with this, since scoring really hasn't dropped, is a huge increase in scoring ability. And, you hear people talk about the ability, the skill level, the skating ability, the shooting ability. Now, right now, even in goaltending right now, there are 23 goaltenders in Division I with a .920 save percentage or above, and there are something like
15 under 2 goals a game right now.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, I mean,
it's a lot.
You've got some really good goaltending going on, yet you have teams scoring a lot. I don't know, it's irresistible force versus immovable object or something.
Yeah, and again, I just go back to the number of shutouts there are out there. There's a ton of shutouts on any given weekend, but there's also a few of those aberration games where teams go nuts offensively. I think that defense is still a big key, and good goaltending is still really critical. I go back to I'll reference that Maine team again. A good goaltender back then had a goals against average in the 3s. Now a really good goaltender is 1 or below. We've seen goaltenders, put up that right around 1 goal. Half the season they spend with below 1 goal against. And when you put up those types of numbers, that's a hard team to beat. You're not expecting to go in and score 3 to 4 or 5 goals on a goaltender that's got a goals against average of 1. So that as soon as you give up 3 goals in a game, you could be done. So that's that fine margin I get to where defense, I think, is, and most coaches would tell you, defense is so important. Everything should start from that back end and funnel forward.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch this as it goes along, but I was surprised to see the downward trend, and even this past weekend below average. I guess we've got teams on the extremes. Yeah,
that's exactly what you have. You're exactly right about that.
Well, Jim, I think it's time to wrap things up. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger. We'll catch you next time on the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.